Good time of the day, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining the webinar, the 103rd webinar in the GIF Education and Training webinar series. This webinar is titled Analysis and Engagement on Non-Electric and Cogeneration Applications of Nuclear Energy. Before we start, a few housekeeping reminders. Please use the sound from your computer. If you encounter any issue, please look for help on the Zoom assistance page. The recording of this webinar, as well as the presentation, will be made available on the GIF public website in a few days. Please share the information about this webinar series with your network. We host one webinar a month. And lastly, and most importantly, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, we encourage you to ask questions during the webinar. To do so, you can use the Q&A button that you should see at the bottom of your screen. And once you click on it, a pop-up will come out and you can then send your question. And at the end of the webinar, our moderator will go through the questions and the presenters will answer them. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today. Dr. Patricia Pavier is the National Technical Director of the Molten Salt Reactor Program for the US Department of Energy, Office of Nuclear Energy. She has been an active member of the GIF Education and Training Working Group since the inception of the group, and she was actually the first chair of this group, and she is now the webinar lead for the ETWG. She has been instrumental in establishing the present series of webinars, and she keeps it flourishing with the energy and enthusiasm she puts in it. Patricia, Dr. Pavier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexei. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the two speakers today, Dr. Chukwudi Azih and Mr. Brent Wilhelm, to present this webinar. So Dr. Chukwudi Azih is a senior research scientist at the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories and heads a section at CNL that perform experimental investigations on high temperature pressure scenarios in current and advanced nuclear reactors. He serves in a leadership role from a technical standpoint in areas of heat removal and utilization from CANDU reactors, Gen 4 International Forum Fleet of Reactor Designs, SMRs. He is a Canadian representative in the Program Management Board for Thermal Hydraulics and Safety of the GIF system arrangement, and in the non-electrical and cogeneration applications of nuclear heat GIF Working Group. He applies his computational and experimental heat transfer expertise to lead efforts in developing technical understanding and facilities for active and passive heat removal systems for different nuclear reactors and thermal storage applications in integrated energy systems involving nuclear energy technology. And I will give you the floor, as Alexei, to introduce your colleague, Mr. Brent Wilhelm.
So in addition to being one of the greatest colleagues I've ever had, Brent is a true and inspiring enthusiast about nuclear energy and its potential. He's currently working at the nuclear energy as a nuclear energy technology and economics analyst at the Nuclear Energy Agencies. And he serves in GIF as the technical secretary for the Non-Electric and Cogeneration Applications Working Group that we usually call the NECA Working Group, and the VHTR system. In his role as an analyst at the NEA, he has led and been closely involved in several key NEA projects, including case studies on SMRs and the development of the SMR dashboard. Before joining the NEA, Brent worked for the Government of Canada as a nuclear science and technology advisor with Natural Resources Canada. He holds a Master's of Science in Physics from the University of Guelph, where he specialized in nuclear energy and planetary bulk geochemistry. I also heard he was involved in the operation of tools on the Mars rover. It's a real pleasure to have Dr. Azih and Brent presenting this webinar, which comes at a time when non-electric applications of nuclear energy are an increasingly important topic. And with that, I'm happy to give them the floor.
Thank you, Alexi. So I will start off with giving an overview of the GIF Non-Electrical Cogeneration Applications Working Group. So you might hear me say NECA Working Group or just NECA for short. That's just referring to that working group. Then I'll give a summary of some of our activities, focusing on activities that we have just performed within the last year. And at that point, I'll hand over to Brent, and he will discuss some highlights from one of our most recent publications, which is a system analysis report on hydrogen production from nuclear energy. Okay, so I will give a brief preface first. As was introduced earlier, I am working at Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. I'm currently at the Chalk River site in Canada, so it's an industrial site. So there's maybe a few alarms that would mean our time might be cut a little short, and I apologize in advance if any of these alarms happen, like things like fire alarms or criticality alarms and things like that. So it is an industrial site, and this is just part of the deal with working in an industrial site. But hopefully the session goes smoothly and none of these alarms means I have to exit. So GIF recognizes that nuclear is not only required for electricity generation, but it can do much more, and it is better utilized when it does more. Nuclear is needed as a serious option in industry and transport to meet environmental and security targets. And we're kind of seeing globally that many policies are officially adopting nuclear in their clean energy portfolio. So amongst other drivers, these is some of the reasons why GIF created this NECA working group. And some of the objectives of the working group are highlighted in the slide. It would be on your right in the slide. And the overall objective is to advance knowledge and access to energy system design, analysis, and optimization tools, and to allow stakeholders to find energy system solutions for different socioeconomic and geographical contexts. So in this vein, the working group meets monthly to support specific tasks, and these tasks vary in frequency. Some are biennial, some are ad hoc, and some are just some are annual. So we hold biennial in-person workshops, as well as ad hoc in-person and virtual workshops, and some examples of these workshops we'll be discussing later. These workshops typically target end users, regulators, policymakers, and researchers, as well as vendors. So annually, we also do lead system analysis publications as one of our objectives, and we'll be discussing, again, Brent will be going over most recent system analysis publication. And we continue to develop the NECA database, and I'll briefly show where you can access this database and what the objective of the database is. So to meet those objectives, we have quite a bit of scope that we go through. But before I discuss the scope, I'll mention there's 11 policies that are part of the working group, and they're represented by the flags on the bottom. I'll just change to a pointer so you can possibly see where I'm looking at. They're represented by the flags on the bottom. Some of the policies are observers, for example, South Africa and the IAEA. Some are full members, like Korea, France, for example, and the group was previously led by Shannon Bragg-Sitton. So some of the work I will show was performed under her leadership. And as of February 2025, there are now two co-chairs of the group, myself from Canada and Aidan Peakman from Amentum based in the UK. So we, as a group, we work on several scope. We conduct a system analysis report with respect to key performance indicators. And we accomplish this by organizing objective techno-economic analyses for specific systems. And we'll talk about some of those systems later on. And we also do qualitative assessments as well as the objective techno-economic analysis. The qualitative assessments are to look at things like perceived readiness and gaps for a given system. So these kind of analyses provide generic information regarding advanced reactor projects around the world, and many of these advanced reactor projects are feature Gen 4 type designs, and many of these designs claim to offer non-electrical and cogeneration capabilities. So through these objective and quantitative system analyses, we can look into potential and limits of some of the broad claims. Since the group was created under GIF, NECA has collected a great deal of existing information from the GIF participants, and this helps with the system analyses. But it also supports the second scope, which is engaging industrial users. So to support demonstration and deployment, we need industry on board in different roles. These roles could be as builders, designers, end users, investors. There's many stakeholders involved. So we're engaging potential end users specifically through ad hoc industrial end user virtual workshops, as well as through our biennial NECA workshops. The goal overall is to capture and understand end user requirements, questions, and concerns for ongoing analysis that we're performing within the working group. So make sure the work we're doing is targeted to something deployable. The third scope is related to the database. We maintain and update this database to assist with access to knowledge and the knowledge base. When you look at nuclear paired with other non-nuclear industry, it's important to have a central database, especially for the non-nuclear collaborators, so that they have access to the information which we take for granted sometimes. So we've realized the need for different energy forms, and we've realized that these needs are regionally different in size and type, as well as in location for each location. And the lessons learned from previous deployments are very valuable. So it's necessary to collate research and deployment information around the world, and to have this in a centralized location. We also support regulatory readiness. We do this in a similar manner as we engage end users. So this is done through our biennial workshops, as well as our ad hoc, workshops that we hold virtually and in person as well. And the last scope, which is to continue international collaboration. This scope is cross-cutting on the 4 previously mentioned items, and that's what enables us to perform some of these activities. So we harness the international collaboration, including technical analysis and knowledge dissemination, by working in tandem with other GIF systems. For example, SIAP, which is the Senior Industry Advisory Panel. I'll try to remember to explain to spell out all acronyms, because in this industry we're used to using acronyms, and we also work with, for example, other international organizations outside of GIF. So, for example, the NEA WG, the Working Group on New Technologies, and we work also with the IAEA. And you'll be seeing some of these cross-cutting collaboration as I present some specifics on the work we do. But first, we'll go over some historical applications of non-electrical and cogeneration in nuclear energy. So as of 2019, there's been over 750 reactor years of experience worldwide that we can build upon. Overall, this is a very small percentage of global reactor experience, less than a fraction of a percent. Some of these historical applications were abandoned after a while. Sometimes it's because competing technologies were much cheaper, and there were many other reasons why some implementations were shut down. However, since some of the early historical applications, the drivers for the energy portfolio have broadened. For example, there's environmental concerns that are driving the technologies that are selected, as well as, in some cases, geopolitical tensions and concerns for energy security. So most of the experience we've had historically have been from water-cooled reactors, which is expected because even broadly for electricity generation, 95% of the energy generated historically has been from water-cooled reactors. So not surprising. And this experience, in terms of non-electrical applications, has been in three main categories. District heating, which has seen, in terms of number of reactors and number of reactor years, probably the broadest application. And desalination of water is another application that has been widely implemented. And then industrial processes for heat. So using nuclear for non-electrical applications is not new. And in the next couple of slides, I'll go through some examples. It's definitely not exhaustive, but kind of highlights the applications that have been done. So we'll start with district heating. So most historical applications in district heating have been in Eastern Europe and in the Russian Federation. There are others outside of these geographical areas, but this is a bulk of the applications. More recently, new applications have been implemented in these previous policies, as well as in China. We're seeing a lot of new applications for district heating. So some of the main factors for consideration for district heating deployment are economic factors such as cost of transmission for heat pipelines, the cost or the existence of or the pre-existence of a distribution network, things like security of the supply and the regulation of the heat market. Some of these are a little bit different from what we have with electricity. For example, electricity is very energy dense in terms of transmission. So very long transfer of electricity, or very long distances transport of electricity. You don't incur a lot of losses compared to heat. Some of these are highlight the differences between implementing a heat transmission versus an electrical transmission. So in some cases listed in this table, the district heating served primarily the plant's auxiliary buildings, for example, or buildings and structures, as well as some of the plant's required systems. And then in other cases, the heat produced served nearby towns and cities. So these require quite short transmission and may or may not have large distribution networks. And again, we can kind of understand why short transmission systems might limit the applicability of nuclear technology for district heating, because there's siting limits for nuclear technology. So you can't just put a reactor anywhere you want. There's specific locations that tend to be approved for nuclear reactors. So we're also seeing, however, that improved technology in industry is increasing the reach of district heating, both in the nuclear industry and outside of nuclear industry. Tens of kilometers is not unheard of these days. For example, in the Haiyang project in China, it currently provides district heating to the surrounding area, but there's an ongoing construction for a 23-kilometer pipeline to increase the reach of the heat generated by that nuclear power plant. And in the non-nuclear industry, we see quite large transmission distances on occasion, specifically in Eastern Europe and Northern Europe. So we're getting towards the sphere of 100-kilometer transmission distance for heat. So some systems have been in operation, as you can see in the table, for over 40 years. There's some systems that for example, in the Russian Federation, that have been in operation for over 50 years, not listed in the table. So this kind of shows the longevity of a heat distribution network is quite good, even with a nuclear reactor. So we'll move on to desalination. The two main processes for desalination, there's thermal processes. Essentially, you're heating water into a vapor form and then condensing the water to purify it. And you might do this in multiple stages. And then there's the membrane driven desalination process, for example, reverse osmosis, where you're essentially what you mostly need there is pumping power. So it's mostly electrical power that's needed. And both of these are applied, have been applied in nuclear installations. So primarily, again, similar to district heating, where sometimes the heat was used for district heating of the local buildings within the power plant. In some cases, for desalination, it's primarily providing feedstock for the plant itself, so the fresh water required by the nuclear power plant. And in other cases, it's providing portable water to cities or portable water to industrial settings to be used as feedstock or as portable water. So again, similar to district heating, some systems we can see have been operating for over 40 years. Again, for example, the DCPP in the USA, the Diablo Canyon power plant, and the Fuki Takahama plant in Japan. These have operated for over 40 years. One of the largest desalination operation was in Kazakhstan. It's closed now, and it ran for 30 years, providing potable water from the Caspian Sea to the local area. And that produced 800,000 tons per day of potable water. So large production has been already demonstrated with nuclear power plants. So the last one we'll talk about is industrial heat. Again, in this sense, of the three categories, it probably has the least, it does have the least reactor years of operational experience to draw on. But there is significant operational experience that we can draw on. Excuse me. So current experience is generally with supply temperatures below 300 degrees Celsius, as you can see in the table, which is expected given that, like I said earlier, most of the existing fleet is water-cooled reactors, and these are the temperature range of water-cooled reactors. However, some things we can note is with even a single power plant, you can have multiple end use. For example, we have the example in Switzerland with the Besno nuclear power plant. And we also have the example of the Bruce Energy Center in Canada, which supported an industrial park which had plastic manufacturing, greenhouses, ethanol plant. There was apple juice concentration, and as well as other things, with getting power from the same power plant. We can also see cases where we have co-location, or for example, in Norway, where we had a pulp paper mill co-located with the Halden reactor within hundreds of meters, as well as we see far distances. So the recent operation in China in Tianwan, where the reactor supports a petrochemical plant, and the distance between the reactor site and the petrochemical site is over 23 kilometers. So one thing we can notice from some of these slides is a lot of the reactors are, again, water-cooled reactors. We do have the one example, which I mentioned in Kazakhstan, that used the sodium fast reactor, which is in the Gen 4 sphere. And in terms of industrial heat, there's plans, for example, in the JEA to use a HTGR, so a high temperature test reactor type design for hydrogen production using steam methane reforming. And there's also plans in China to use the HTRPM, which is a high temperature gas reactor, a pebble bed version of that of high temperature gas reactor. And there's intent to use the HTRPM 600 to provide energy for the petrochemical industry. So considerations with respect to Gen 4 technologies and the historical experience, we can see why for existing reactors, this is the temperature. So on the horizontal axis, I have temperature, and then on the vertical, it's just different applications. So you can see that the temperature of light water reactors lends itself very well to seawater desalination, district heating, pulp paper production, some overlap there. So we can see why these historically have been the sort of the low-hanging fruit for implementing nuclear technology. But when we look at the Gen 4 reactor fleet, we see higher temperatures are possible. So as these reactors get developed and demonstrated and deployed, we can start to encroach into these other processes without having to augment the heat using electricity, for example. So we're seeing that technology improvements such as longer distances of heat transport, higher temperature materials, thermal energy solutions, things like this are expanding the sphere of influence of nuclear energy. And also with the global changes in decarbonization incentives, this is also expanding the sphere of nuclear influence. So we'll now talk about the database. The database is a global repository of activities relevant to non-electrical applications. It contains 5 main categories. Firstly, it was implemented in a spreadsheet format, and we're finalizing it into a digital form to facilitate updates. So the QR code there will give you a link to accessing the digital form. But we can see past and existing demonstrations are logged in the database. We're also looking at planned demonstrations and commercial systems, and we have those set in the database, as well as modeling tools to model these systems, collaborative incentives, and case studies. So the plan again is to finalize the digital form of the database this year, and then release it. It's actually already in a released version to the public, but then another official advertisement for it. So that covers some of the historical work done. I'll mention one more thing relevant to past and existing demonstration. We're working closely with the IAEA, who also have a database. So we want these databases to be complementary. So for the in-person workshops, we'll first talk about some of the biennial workshops we held. So we've held 2 biennial workshops since the NECA Working Group was launched. And then we'll briefly talk about some of the ad hoc workshops. And then I'll go into depth on the most recent workshop we held, which is the workshop on for end users. So the first workshop was held in October 2022 in Toronto. It was held in conjunction with the GIF Industry Forum, and it was co-organized by the International Framework for Nuclear Energy Corporation. So this workshop was held on the margins of the G4SR conference, which is held every 2 years as well. And in the workshop, through panel discussions and interactive dialogue, deployment opportunities were discussed in which nuclear energy systems could be used to support heat and electricity demands outside of the power sector. Participation included research institutions, end users, and vendors. The research community spoke about computational tools and facilities that could support system analysis and demonstrations to accelerate paths to commercialization and for advanced reactor deployment. Members of the end-use community included chemical processing, oil and gas, ammonia production, and the like. And they shared details of their energy needs and requirements, and they raised potential issues regarding integration of nuclear to drive their processes, their specific processes. The vendors were also participated, and they discussed their technologies and shared some of their performance capabilities that they anticipate, some of the system considerations that they've looked at, and their anticipated deployment timelines. So some key findings are listed on the slide. I'll only highlight a few of them. One of them was that there was a tendency to focus on the shiny object in GIF, which is, of course, these high temperature systems, because the GIF reactors can handle them. But it was noted that we should not ignore the low-hanging fruit, which is the lower temperature applications below 550 degrees Celsius that are still important. So district heating and desalination are still important applications, because again, with the environmental concerns, even though we have current installations, they might not always be powered by clean energy technologies. So one of the outcomes of the workshop was to get a broader view from end users, specifically end users outside of North America. And so this fueled the location for the second workshop. So the second workshop was held in Busan, Korea, had 75 participants. It was hosted by the Korean Nuclear Industry Association and the Korean Nuclear International Cooperation Foundation. Co-organized with KERI, which is the Korea Atomic Energy Research Institute, and it was held on the margins of the annual CAP conference. CAP is Korea Atomic Power Conference. So some specific targets for this workshop were energy end users in hard-to-abate industrial sectors, regulators, nuclear energy developers targeting non-electrical applications. Once again, there was broad participation from non-nuclear stakeholders. For example, steel manufacturing, petrochemical industry, hydrogen industries. We had regulators both from the nuclear and non-nuclear sectors that participated in this workshop. And in this workshop, it was stressed that more detailed engagement with end users, as well as consideration for non-nuclear regulators, financiers, insurance, and investors, that would be good to build confidence in deployment and demonstration towards commercialization. Excuse me. Just going to take a drink of water here. So, in addition to end users, in addition to the end users' disposition of not operating the nuclear power plant, which was one of the outcomes or the key findings from the first conference, the end users don't really want to operate these reactors. They want to get the energy from the reactors, and they also don't want to deal with the waste that comes from the reactors. They'd rather have a separate entity handle that. So in addition to that disposition, in this specific workshop, they stressed the need for commercial viability of nuclear technologies via demonstration. So this gives more confidence and reduces risk on their end. So another outcome was that end users and regulators were interested in tools that capture nuclear technology. And this is specifically coming from end users and regulators that were outside of the nuclear industry. They were interested in getting more information on the tools that we use in the nuclear industry, and how they could get access to these tools and understand what each of these tools actually do. All right. So those cover the two workshops we've had so far. We're planning, we're scheduled, I should say, for another workshop, biennial workshop in 2026. And some of the details of that workshop will be informed by some of the activities that we do this year. So in addition to the workshops I mentioned, we do ad hoc workshops, as well as attend meetings. So I'll talk about some of the special sessions we attend, and then we'll go over the industrial engagement. So the SNETP, which is the Sustainable Nuclear Energy Technology Platform, it's a European-based framework, and we do have members from the NECA Working Group that attend these workshops. There was a special session in 2023 on non-electrical and hybrid energy systems. We had a special session in the Senior Industrial Advisory Panel. This is a GIF group in 2024, and that session was held in Ottawa. I believe Brent actually presented in that session. And we've had some joint meetings. So as I mentioned earlier, we do collaborate internationally. So we've had some joint meetings with the IEA, GIF, and NEA, had 2 workshops, one in January 2024. And in the January 2024 workshop is where we sort of ironed out the details for the first system analysis that we did. And then the second workshop, we presented the preliminary results from that system analysis. And at the end of this talk, Brent will be going over those results. So now we'll focus on some of the work this year. So firstly, some of the engagement analysis activities that we're doing this year is fueled based on what we've learned from previous workshops. So I've discussed some of the findings from the previous workshops that we set up. And based on that, we set up some virtual and hybrid workshops for the 2025 year. The end user virtual workshop, which was held in June 17th to 18th, it was a 2-day workshop. It focused on identifying key challenges faced by industrial and energy end users in adopting nuclear, non-electric, and cogeneration applications. I should refer to that non-electric and cogeneration applications using nuclear. So a sub-focal point of this workshop was beyond technological and financial considerations, which tend to sometimes dominate conversations. We also focused on other considerations such as those related to regulatory approval, policy framework, logistics of implementation of nuclear installations with non-nuclear installations, and operational feasibility. And of course, we were able to tie into some of the historical experience to address some of these concerns or to navigate some of these concerns. So the workshop serves as input for the scope of the regulatory workshop that's planned in November. We've finally selected the date. So November 12th to 13th would be the regulatory workshop. And it will also be a virtual workshop. And it, as I said, is informed by the outcomes of the end user workshop. So for the end user workshop, we did have some of the regulators in the audience, but not as active participants because the focus was getting input from the end users. So in between these 2 workshops, so the end user and regulatory workshop, we have other coordination events that we've held, and we're going to hold, which include 2 deep dives. So the first coordination event is not shown in the slide, but it was to exploit synergies that we have with the IAEA, so the International Atomic Energy Agency. Sorry, I haven't explained that acronym before now. We're exploiting these synergies to work between the 2 groups because there's a lot of coordinated work that we could do together to better utilize resources. The second workshop will be in Busan in October. The location is just coincidentally aligned with where we held the workshop in 2024, but this just happens to be where the EGPG meeting will be this year, so that's why the workshop is in Busan. And so this meeting will be held on the margins of the expert group and policy group, that's what EGPG means, meeting. And it will further inform the activities that we'll be doing in the upcoming year. So it will also inform, for example, the biennial workshop we hold in 2026. Now I'll spend the rest of the time I have giving some information on the virtual workshop we held with end users, and then I'll hand over to Brent Wilhelm, who will give a detailed talk on the system analysis report. There's a link on the bottom to the proceedings from the workshops. Actually, throughout my slides, there's links to proceedings of the workshops and the events that we've held. So what I'm going to say in this presentation will not be completely exhaustive, but if you want more information, you can certainly go click these links and read through these proceedings. So the workshop was a 2-day virtual event. It brought together end users, regulators, vendors, and discussed non-electrical and cogeneration applications. So the specific concentration was in the end users. Regulators and vendors were generally observers, but there was a 1 hour discussion, open discussion at the end of each of the days, where it was kind of an open participation. So anyone could speak. Having consulted the stakeholders, it was decided to have these workshops as invitation only. This was to actually enable open discussion, and we followed the Chatham House rules. So when you look at the publications, you will see that the proceedings are discussed, but we don't attribute statements to specific attendees. So the session had there were 4 sessions in the workshop. The first 2 were in the first day, and then the second 2 sessions were in the second day. So the first session was on operational experience with non-electrical systems. This session, we had presentations from cogeneration and co-location projects, generation with long transmission distances, so not co-located, and also we had presentations from demonstration using high temperature reactor and industrial processes. So some of the key takeaways were that efficient steam utilization and waste heat management can be attained, as seen from historical and more recent applications. However, there are some mutual dependencies between the plants that must be managed. So things like outages affect don't just affect the nuclear power plant, they also affect the end user. User changes in things in policy or energy requirements, things like operational service life of the reactor as well as the end use have to be somewhat in line. And there's also cascading burden on regulatory requirements. So if a regulatory requirement changes in, for example, the end use side, how does that affect the safety case for the reactor and things like that? Navigating through all of these. And another example is, for example, we're in the nuclear industry, we have some security requirements that are associated with the nuclear power plant. So how does, in the case of co-location, how does this affect the end user in terms of their design and their operation? So the second session focused on district heating and industrial networks. And in this session, speakers discussed the role of heat networks and the opportunity for nuclear energy in providing energy to district heat systems, as well as industrial heating systems. So some of the particular things discussed were, for example, advantage in some jurisdictions where existing heat infrastructure offers a compelling advantage because in terms of cost, because the infrastructure is already there and all you're doing is swapping out the source. However, in these cases, there's also some requirements in the end use for monitoring now that the source has changed, monitoring related to nuclear installation. So we discussed some refinement in terms of excuse me, in terms of level of governance for heating networks in comparison to electrical networks. So electrical networks are typically governed at a broader level than heating networks, which would change the interface between, for example, a nuclear power plant installations, the end users that and the policies that they're dealing with. So electrical, typically larger policies, like for example in Canada, you could have it province level or even federal level, sometimes overlapping with the states, with the United States, whereas heating networks are sometimes municipal type level governance. And there was some discussion as well on thermal storage, thermal energy storage, because the technologies there have actually greatly been developed recent times. So in terms of meeting cyclical demand, which was some of the earlier burdens on the nuclear power plant. With thermal energy storage, we can relieve some of this burden. The third session was on the diversity of non-electrical and cogeneration applications in nuclear energy. So we got, in this case, speakers shared their analysis on a range of applications that could be supported with nuclear energy. So the speakers were primarily from non-nuclear industry. And they did discuss some of the challenges that they identified from the analyses. And these challenges extended beyond techno-economic considerations. For example, some noted that existing standards often treat nuclear and the process facilities separately, which creates a potential gap at the interface where these two facilities interact. So some sort of holistic regulation might solve that problem, but might also create other headaches in terms of timelines and things like that. So that's kind of the flavor of discussion that was going on there, which was good for the regulators to hear what the end users were, what's in the mind of the end users in terms of their concerns. And then the fourth one was on opportunities for process industries. And here the speakers discussed the scale and urgency of the energy challenge in process industries, including industries such as hydrogen, chemical production, even and petrochemicals as well, which is in my head a subset of chemical production, but it tends to be separated. Some discussions were related to the ability to align with industrial project timelines. So some industries have specific timelines that they're used to working on. And so they were discussing how these timelines fit with the timelines we have experienced in nuclear installations. These timelines are quite broad. They're both in terms of getting the project underway, operational life of both the chemical plant and the nuclear reactors, things like this. Regulatory pathways, for example, were discussed, and even things like financial frameworks. So one favorable thing that was highlighted was the position of large industrial sectors to deliver complex first-of-a-kind nuclear projects due to the experience with this kind of large-scale infrastructural development. So we were finding that the larger scale companies are they're quite familiar with these kinds of projects and regulatory processes. So they're already used to doing projects with multiple regulators, for example. So in this case, these kinds of end users did not really see the regulatory or did not have the perceived regulatory burden that some of the other end users had. So both days included, as I said, an hour of interactive discussions. There were some specific logistical and operational findings related, which I've alluded to earlier. But I've listed some of the key findings from the workshops. There's certainly more findings you will find in the actual proceedings listed below. And we've also given a flavor of the audience for the workshop. So you can see Lab University was the highest. The very significant participation from end users. We had some participation from government, regulators as well, and other industrial organizations. We intentionally limited the participation of vendors to vendors that already had sort of memorandums of understanding and things of similar nature with non-electrical application end users, just to limit the participation. As per what I said earlier, the openness of the discussion was hinged on this invitation only type model. So some of the key findings were, again, as I showed earlier, combined heat and power, which is what CHP means, is quite mature. There's historical implementation of it. And we've noticed both from historical implementation and current analysis that the the deployment depends on local conditions. Experience from the past and current project show that close physical and functional integration between reactors and industrial facilities requires quite a bit of coordination, and the coordination occurs between multiple industries. Sometimes there's additional safety considerations, for example, that are associated with changes in utilization at the end use, for example. So there's things like such as like the need for an alternative heat sink for a nuclear reactor, for example. Another key finding was demonstration projects are critical for confidence and for regulatory clarity, especially for things like co-location, solutions for security requirements from nuclear, which I spoke about earlier. And these solutions have to be also palatable to the co-located technologies to ensure success. Another key finding was that process industries, which I kind of concluded with in the last slide, are well positioned for first-of-kind projects. And finally, public trust and policy evolution are essential. And some existing deployments discuss some of their creative ways that they've used for public engagement, for example, through open tours of their facilities, and conferences within their facilities to boost trust, especially if you're distributing heat to a local community. The community is interested in seeing how this heat is generated and things like that. So as I said, the proceedings are published. Full work summary, I've given a link again. This link is kind of peppered through the slides, so you shouldn't be able to miss it. And as I said earlier, we'll distribute the slides openly. So the working group continues to engage with end users bilaterally through support of regulatory engagement activities. In November, we're going to have the regulatory workshop. Again, this will be an invitation-only workshop. And then in October, we'll have our deep dive that will inform the program of work for the working group in 2026. All right, so I'll be handing over to Brent because this is our last scope that I haven't talked about yet. And this is on system analysis. So we created this 6x3x6 framework for system analysis. So we have the 6 reactor systems, and then we have the 3 reactor sizes, and then we have 6 potential applications. So any combination of these could be used for a system analysis report. And Brent will be talking about the first system analysis report, which is on hydrogen production from nuclear energy.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Azih, for that excellent presentation. And hello, everybody. My name is Brent, and I work with the Nuclear Energy Agency, who provides technical secretariat services to the GIF NECA Working Group, as well as the NEA H2VAL Working Group, Hydrogen Value Chains Working Group. I will be discussing a report that was co-published between both of these 2 working groups, the NECA Working Group in GIF and the H2VAL Working Group in the NEA. And it's focused on nuclear hydrogen, in particular from an HTGR producing hydrogen through high temperature steam electrolysis. Okay, so Dr. Azih alluded to the scope of system analysis that the NECA Working Group is considering, which is on screen here, the 6x3x6 matrix. This slide is just to emphasize that this initial report is really our first crack at doing system analysis, and we chose a HTGR system due to its technical maturity compared to other Gen 4 systems, and also hydrogen production, as it was the most interest to most of the GIF member countries for this initial study. Dr. Azih mentioned in January 2024 an initial workshop where we scoped the system analysis approach. After some discussion, in addition to narrowing down on an HTGR to produce hydrogen, we also decided that we wanted to pursue 2 different types of system analysis in parallel. Type 1 is modeling, So using existing system modeling tools that exist within national labs and GIF and NEA partner organizations to model the same generic scenario and share the results as part of a crowdsourced modeling exercise. So that's type 1. Type 2 was a survey. We wanted to elicit expert advice or input on the perceived readiness of this system, both from a technological readiness perspective, as well as a broader commercial readiness from a regulatory, revenue, public acceptance aspect, et cetera. So I will go through these two in detail. So related to the system analysis, the first step was to create a generic scenario that all of the modeling teams could use. So from January 2024 to about August, there was an iterative process to develop the table of input values on the right. This involved a literature review with members of the GIF NECA Working Group and the NEA H2 Working Group, and we provided this list to the modeling teams to use as initial assumptions for their model. And we also established the scenario itself. So in the bottom left, you'll see an 800 megawatt thermal HTGR system producing hydrogen through a high temperature steam electrolysis stack in cogeneration mode with thermal storage. And you'll also notice that the hydrogen, if you can see my mouse, is being consumed at a constant rate at an industrial process. And we also made the assumption that there would be a market for oxygen that is produced as a byproduct through electrolysis, and we would be able to sell that oxygen that is produced to offset the levelized cost of hydrogen. So I won't go through these details, but there will be a link on the last slide to access the report where you can access all of these variables as well. So we shared that information with a number of modeling teams, and we received modeling outputs from 4 different teams, which are included in the report. So the first was the UK National Nuclear Laboratory, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, using their HEAP model, the Canadian Nuclear Laboratory using their HISO model, and the CEA in France using their PERSE model. So the results from these 4 models are included in the report, and aggregated results are shared. I will note that there are a number of other partners that are still interested in providing modeling outputs for this kind of crowdsourced modeling exercise. A few of them are listed in the last paragraph here. The SciPAM code, also from Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Gemini 4.0 has a very similar scenario through parallel work that is wrapping up this year. So we hope to include those results, as well as our G4 Econ's GIF economics tool through our partners in the Generation 4 International Forum. So we will probably launch a second version of this report once we have these additional outputs combined for publication early next year. And again, I will skip the details, but happily to provide a link for you to access the numbers. This is a table of the results for the current published works, and notably, the results converge towards reasonably similar values, which is good news, I think. And I think it makes sense given that we'd used a generic scenario that was quite simple. In particular, so using this 800 thermal HTGR system to produce hydrogen, 70 million kilograms of hydrogen would be produced per year at about $3.5 per kilogram of hydrogen. And this is an enormous amount of hydrogen, but it actually may not be unreasonable for many applications. For example, the Korean steelmaking company POSCO is exploring their HyREX process, which intends to use hydrogen as a reducing agent for the production of steel. And in their plant planned in the 2030s, they intend to consume about 100 million kilograms of hydrogen per year, which is in the ballpark of what we're seeing here with this 800 megawatt system. Okay, so that was the first type. Again, in parallel, we did a survey and where we asked experts in the hydrogen and nuclear sectors to comment on the perceived readiness of this system. Again, the system is a high temperature gas reactor producing hydrogen through high temperature steam electrolysis. On screen here is the demographics from the survey. And in the next two slides, I will show results from the perceived technological readiness and commercial readiness. But you'll see we have pretty good representation from both the hydrogen sector and nuclear sector, including technology developers themselves, as well as governments and other interests. This slide shows the results related to technological readiness. We use a technological readiness framework, or TRL framework, technological readiness level, adapted for our purposes. We referenced, I think, 9 different TRL frameworks in order to create the one that we used in our report. Again, all that information is in the report itself if you were interested in which TRL framework we used. In general, we found that experts believe that for an HTGR, high temperature gas reactor, and an HTSE, high temperature steam electrolysis, so these are the first and second columns in the plot. Individually, these two technologies are commercially or technologically mature or approaching technological maturity. However, the integrated system of a combined HTGR with HTSE is considered to be not technologically mature at all. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to advance the TRL of the integrated system. Similarly, for commercial readiness broadly, we asked the experts to comment on several characteristics related to the integrated HTGR and HTSE system. In this case, we used an existing framework, the Commercial Readiness Index, which was developed by ARENA, the renewable energy community in Australia, and we adapted it for the purposes of our system. So the columns along the bottom, if you cannot see them, it's regulatory readiness, stakeholder acceptance. There are 2 related to financial readiness, whether it's a known costs or known revenue potential, supply chain readiness, and market opportunities. And we identified that there are many gaps to a commercial integrated system. The largest gaps appear to be related to regulatory readiness, uncertainty regarding cost data, and in particular revenue data, and identifying if there is even a market demand for low carbon hydrogen at this scale, at this price point. Experts also commented on estimated timeline for both a demonstration and an integrated commercial system. And the values ranged considerably, but generally they believe that an integrated demonstration could be somewhere between 2028 and 2035, and an integrated commercial system would be approaching 2050. So I think this is my second to last slide, so I will just summarize some key findings from the report, and on the next slide, I'll give you a link to access it yourself. But first, the opportunity for nuclear hydrogen appears to be quite compelling for large undisturbed demand for hydrogen at a single point of consumption. So I gave the example of using hydrogen as a reducing agent for steel, in which hydrogen consumption could be enormous at a single point of consumption. So that might be favorable for nuclear hydrogen. The second point here, there is definitely a role for light water reactors, especially initially to help advance the TRL of an integrated system, but Gen 4 reactors will also have a role in the future. The third one, we've identified challenges related to the integration of an HTGR reactor with an HTSE system, and we identified some options to help mitigate these challenges. The fourth bullet, in our literature review, we noted that HTSE stacks appear to be quite modular in nature, and given the learning curve literature that's existing, I think primarily from Idaho National Lab, who has done some analysis on this, we recommend a 200 megawatt HTSE system to be demonstrated to help this technology reach commercial maturity. And then finally, we make some recommendations to continue the work that's being done globally to advance regulatory readiness for integrated systems like this, including the work that's already being done in the UK, USA, Canada, France, and Korea. Okay, so this is my last slide. The link to access the report is in the middle, and the QR code just to the right will also help you download that report. I would just like to remind everyone that this is a system analysis report that was co-published by both the GIF NECA Working Group, the Non-Electric Cogeneration Applications Working Group within GIF, and the NEA Hydrogen Value Chains Working Group, and it was a really productive collaborative activity. And in early 2026, we are anticipating a future version with additional outputs to complement what's already been published. So I think we'll move on to questions, but first I will turn the floor to my colleague Alexei, who will share details about the upcoming webinars.
Thank you both for this very interesting presentation. So please, just before we go into the question and answer session, and please do ask your questions right now in the Q&A pane, and we'll take them in a moment. And please join us for our upcoming webinars and share the information with people in your network that might be interested in the topics covered by those webinars. So at the end of September, we will have a webinar presenting a report by another GIF working group, the Proliferation, Resistance and Physical Protection Working Group, on the safety security interfaces, safety security safeguards interfaces in a case study on a pebble bed SMR. In October, we will have a German perspective on research and development related to the safe disposal of nuclear waste. And in November, we will have from the CEA in France a look at severe accidents in FFRs, safety study approach, prevention, and mitigation by design. With that, I'll give back the floor to Patricia and our presenters today for the Q&A session. And please, everyone in the audience, do ask your questions now so we can take them.
Thank you very much, Alexei. I see several questions. The first one has two questions. So I'm gonna ask the first and then leave the floor to the presenters, and then I will ask the second one. And thank you very much for this anonymous attendee. A great webinar. So this is what we always love to hear. So the first questions, based on your informed view of what is happening worldwide in non-electric applications of nuclear, what do you feel are the lowest hanging fruits? Easy to connect to nuclear, important need, market, realistically deployable reactor in the short term, decarbonization potentials. So what do you feel are the lowest hanging fruits?
Okay, I can take that question.
Thank you.
In my opinion, the lowest hanging fruit are similar to what we've seen already deployed. So the district energy systems and desalination. In terms of nuclear broadly, I don't know if the question was specifically for Gen 4 reactors or just nuclear, so I'll answer for both. So for nuclear broadly, there will be more deployments of light water reactors. So these two are the lowest hanging fruit in terms of broad application. However, they also fall in the sphere of Gen 4 reactors. So a reactor technology that produces, let's say, thermal energy at 500 degrees Celsius can still support district heating and desalination type applications. What we do see broadly, though, is that even for the recent Gen 4 reactor deployments, industrial processes are also within the sphere of low-hanging fruit. And I will describe this separately because in the industrial sector, the low-hanging fruit are connecting of mature industrial sectors with the Gen 4 reactors. So that would be my second level of maybe let's call it medium hanging fruit. And then the fruit way on top of the tree is where you have the Gen 4 reactor, which is a future reactor coupled with a new industrial process, which both need demonstration as well. And I can give some specific examples, but if you want that.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Chuck. The second part of the question is, what could be improved in terms of private-public partnership to bring more demonstration projects to reality?
This one's a little bit more difficult because the partnership is very location based. It depends on the local regulatory and political environment, as well as the local stakeholder, so the end user comfort with or outlook on nuclear. So there's not one answer to this question that can cover all of it. But in terms of answering what we're seeing in terms of bringing demonstration projects to reality, one thing we're noticing from recent deployments is that although a lot of currently planned nuclear installations are very electricity focused because there is also a gap in electrical production. After deployment, there is some interest in extending the mandate to non-electrical applications like heat projects. So I did give an example earlier. Even with that was with the Haiyang project in China, where even with the heat applications, once that starts, the scope of it can broaden. So originally in that project, it was providing heat to just a local community, and now they're building a longer pipeline to expand the reach of the heat network. So operational experience is going to be key to providing the required de-risking the projects, essentially. So providing the required framework for which we can get the right financial backing as well as political backing to expand our mandates. And again, this changes from area to area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Chuck. Second questions. Part of the system analysis, as I understand it, is also related to policy. Have you analyzed which of the operating nuclear power plants for cogeneration are publicly operated assets?
So maybe I can take this.
Yes.
Okay, sure. So in the system analysis report that is published, we don't have an assessment of the political environment for the various MPPs for cogeneration. It is within scope of the NECA Working Group to evaluate this, and there is some discussion on and looking at this in more detail. At the moment, we've done a generic scenario that is not location dependent or environment dependent from a political aspect. But certainly it will have a role in the viability of these projects. So something we'll look to consider in the future.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Next question. You mentioned that fewer regulations may be applicable in the case of non-electricity generation. If a reactor is used for process heat, will it not also need to be connected to a grid to ensure services for normal and abnormal conditions?
I could answer that, or Brent wants to tackle, but I'll start, and then maybe Brent can
Sure.
say anything. I might have misspoke, or maybe the sentence was misunderstood, but on the demand side, it's possible that the regulations are not as stringent as on the supply side when you have nuclear paired, for example, something like district heat. So when I say fewer regulations, I don't mean overall, I mean on the demand side. But once you integrate these two systems, then especially if they're co-located, then they get subject to the full plethora of regulations, both from the demand and the supply side. So you actually get more regulations because, as you said, most operating frameworks still have the reactor producing electricity, so they're still subject to all of those regulations. And then they will have the added regulations from whatever the demand side is on the heat side. Specifically for co-location, it's a little more difficult when you have the sort of that boundary where you can say this is the nuclear island and then this is the end use jurisdiction. Then you have a little bit of an easing in that burden of regulation. Do you have something to add, Brent, or
sure.
Yeah.
Maybe just related to, is it required to connect a reactor to the grid? And no, there are costs associated with connecting to the grid, and at the end of the day, a reactor gives you steam, and if you can use all of that steam, it may be the best business decision to not connect to a grid. However, it seems that connecting to a grid or even having secondary markets provides quite a bit of flexibility that might be attractive for industrial users who may have a unpredictable need of heat or otherwise need to manage how they use or consume
it. Thank you, Chuck and Brent. The last question that I see for now, are some Gen 4 technologies better suited than others for thermal energy storage? Maybe SFR due to intermediate circuit being already existent, or HTGRs for using critical CO2?
So the thermal storage application will depend on the nature of the actual network, both supply and demand. I wouldn't say some are better suited. Maybe some are better suited to certain applications. So, for example, if your end use is for a district heat application, you're going to need to have a secondary and probably even a tertiary side to your distribution system. But then your storage temperatures don't have to be as high. So even if you have a reactor that's producing high temperature, you might want to degrade that heat to a lower grade heat for storage, because that's what the demand side is. But then if you have an industrial process that needs high temperature, for example, in the case study we did for the system analysis report, then certain reactor types will be more amenable to that. So in the case of hydrogen, you want the heat at high grade. So you would want to pair a reactor that can produce high grade heat with a high grade thermal energy storage, for example, molten salt, 2-tank molten salt systems that's already widely used in the concentrated solar power industry. So I guess the short answer is that depending on the project, some reactor types are better suited, but it's not necessarily for the thermal energy storage, it's for the end use. That's what determines both the reactor type and the energy storage type.
Very good. Thank you so much. What do you think about the IS process GIA has been developing for hydrogen production?
Oh, this is a very specific question.
Yes, I know, and I'm sorry, I even don't know IS.
IS is the iodine sulfur. Brent, are you able to take this, or
sure? Yes, okay. I'm not a hydrogen production expert, so I will reserve opinion on this. I will note that there still is a lot of interest in thermochemical processes like the IS process that GIAEA has been advancing, and a lot of promise for those. However, globally, there's been a lot more push to move towards hydrogen production quickly, and I think high temperature steam electrolysis seems to be a scalable, more near-term hydrogen production process that could also benefit from high temperatures like the IS process. So it's still being worked on. I think there's a lot of promise, but the interest in hydrogen production is also shifting to what makes commercial sense at the moment.
Thank you, Brent. The last question that I see, can the presenters comment on the importance to end users and difficulties to regulators of having a small EPZ for co-location? Extent rules may be prohibitive.
This is actually a good question, and it's something we can navigate in our workshop in November. I don't recall anything that has come up yet on this subject, but it's something we can certainly bring up in the regulatory workshop, which the end users will also be participating in November. So this is, I'm just going to write it down, and I can get back to you or send you kind of the link to the proceedings once we have that workshop completed, and that would probably give you a more exhaustive answer to the question.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck, and for everyone, feel free to contact the presenters. You have their email address on the Meet the Presenter slide. You will have access to the slides. You will have access to the recorded webinar very shortly on the GIF website. Give us just a few days. So I always say last question, but there's now another question. Are there any cases where turbine-less nuclear power plants are being considered for pure heat offtake end users? I guess this would have a significant impact in lowering costs, but will significantly impact safety systems.
As Brent said earlier, of course, you're not required to connect to any grid with a nuclear power plant. There are case studies where the power plant, the nuclear power plant is purely producing heat. However, that being said, in general, at least what I see is that once it comes to actual deployment or commercialization investigations, then most installations do require some form of electricity, and then at that point they do an exergy analysis, and they do their as well as their I guess financial analysis, and it does tend that they eventually end up running their own, even if it's just a local or a non-grid connected electrical system. They do tend to favor having something like that. I'm trying to think of any specific example of something that's gone towards deployment where it's just purely heat. But you're right. If you don't have that that turbine, it does change your safety case significantly.
Maybe I will note
Sure,
one
Brent.
case of sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry to cut you. Like smaller SMRs dedicated specifically for district heating. I think there are some universities that are considering demonstrations that may not be connecting to electricity generation, and reactors like the Cogen LDL-50. I don't believe that they're considering electricity generation, but we may need to get back to you on that.
Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I do not see any questions in the Q&A box, so I would like to thank first our two presenters. Thank you so much, Chuck and Brent. It was a very informative presentation. I would like also to thank the audience because your interaction through the Q&A is very important. I think presentations are excellent, but also the questions that you are asking are perfect for this type of webinar. So thank you again, Chuck and Brent. Thank you again to the audience. I don't know if you want to add something, Alexei.
Thank you, Patricia, for moderating this webinar, to our speakers, to our listeners, and I look forward to our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We wish you a good day, good evening. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.